Magandang araw po sa inyo. Welcome po sa isa na namang episode ng online series ni Inang Pamantasan, kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hangganan. Ito ang PNU Talks. Ako nga pala si Concepcion G. Belza at ako ang inyong Learning from Home buddy sa episode na ito. Ngayong araw ay pag-usapan natin ang paksang The Multicultural Contexts of Philippine Children's Literature. In this episode, I intend to achieve the following objectives. First, analyze select stories for children in multicultural contexts. Second, assert that children's literature carries with it ideological positioning. Third, promote the reading of Filipino children's literature for entertainment as well as for critical reading. At present, it can be said that considerable developments have happened in the field of Philippine children's literature, as evidenced by more and more children's books written and published each year. Copies of children's storybooks are now displayed in prominent areas of major bookstores in the country, and publishers of materials for children are growing in number. Children's literature is widely accepted. However, among the literary genres, children's literature tends to remain uncanonical and marginalized by being excluded from critical and theoretical discourses to which it could contribute vitally. It is regarded as a minor discourse in the myriad of literary genres, as observed not only by local writers, but also by foreign critics. This genre is one of the glossed over areas of critique and has been for so long a time misrepresented as neutral, universalized, true, and innocuous. It is the province of women, as there are more female than male authors of children's literature. It is not my intention for this episode to talk about the history of children's literature in the Philippines. Let me just mention a few highlights. On May 25 of 1925, Severino Reyes published his first story for children in Liwayway magazine under the pen name Lola Basyang. It was the first of about 400 stories written for each issue of the magazine, many of them retelling folk tales of classics from other parts of the world. As the series title implied, many of the stories were familiar in tone, similar to the kind a child would have heard from his grandmother. In 1989, the Carlos Palanca Foundation opened a new category in its highly prestigious annual literary competition, the short story for children, in both English and Filipino. The stories to be presented here are 8 of the winning pieces of the Don Carlos Palanca Awards for Literature, Short Story for Children, English category. I stand with a position echoed by Townsend, who said that children's books must be judged as part of the literature in general, and therefore be judged by much the same standards as adult books. A good children's book must not only be pleasing to children, it must be a good book in its own right. Although it may be intended to entertain children, it is also an avenue by which values of the community and the state are perpetuated. Critics recognize the power of children's literature to perpetuate ideology. It has been argued from a number of social and critical perspectives that language as a system of signification, what is commonly referred to as discourse, is endemically and pervasively imbued with ideology. Stephens explained that the discourses of children's fiction are pervaded by ideological presuppositions, sometimes obtrusively and sometimes invisibly. The didactic project of children's literature is achieved through the expression of deliberate advocacy of social practices or the implicit encoding of social practices. In some selected Palangka Award-winning stories for children analyzed, it was found out that stories for children represent different cultures or cultural elements. The discussion on multiculturalism is contextualized to pay attention to the textual or narrative parts and the different stories that touch on the characteristic traits and values of cultural groups and other issues confronting the social groups that emerge in society. Let us unlock some ideas that are embedded in the stories for children that carry the sentiments and voices of the other emerging groups in society, which are formed due to the impact of globalization and the shifting international paradigms. These socially diverse groups include the gay men and lesbians, the single parents, the indigenous people, the economically marginalized individuals, the physically challenged, the militant and rebel groups, the Filipino migrants, and the Filipino seafarers. The different groups have agenda of their own, and they have struggles of their own, brought by their existing conditions. It is also interesting to note how their issues are contextualized in literature for children. Let us see the story titled Hero the Rooster and Basha the Hen. On Casio's chicken farm, roosters and hens have their own places and own jobs. Roosters stay at the nook and they take turns each day to wake the entire farm. Hens stay in the coop where they lay and nest their eggs. Hero the rooster and Basho the hen are different from other chickens. Hero the rooster stays in the coop and brings with him an oblong stone. He nests in the stone all day long with the hens. Basha the hen stays at the nook and wears 3 dried leaves on her head as her comb. She practices crowing her tiktilaok all day long with the roosters. When Hero is tasked to wake the farm and Basha is tasked to hatch her egg, both chickens are forced to dig deep and go through the journey of self-discovery to accomplish the task assigned to them, while at the same time staying true to who they truly are. The story, Hero the Rooster and Basha the Hen, tackles the issue of gays and lesbians in society, personified in the characters of a rooster and a hen. Society has traditionally assigned certain roles to men as breadwinners, leaders, and defenders, and to women as caregivers, nurturers, and supporters. In the story, the chickens did not behave exactly as what Mang Casio, the owner of the farm, expects from them. Hero, being a rooster, is expected to perform his tiktilaok and stays in the nook where other roosters are placed. But Hero behaves the other way. Likewise, Basha is expected to hatch eggs and stays in the coop where other hens are placed. But just like Hero, Basha behaves the other way. Later in the story, Hero finds out that Basha, like him, is not also comfortable with the set of rules Mang Casio wants them to follow. Knowing that both of them have the same struggle to fight, they decided to support each other and assert their difference, even if it will take them time to make Mang Pasio realize that hero, even if a rooster does not know how to crow, and Basha, even if a hen cannot hatch eggs. This simple story of chickens in a farm is not as simple as it appears to be, for it brings to the surface the struggles of the gay men and lesbians who are placed in a box to fit in to what society wants. Homosexuality is not tolerated in a heterosexual society. This explains why Mang Pasio keeps on putting back Basha to the coop and Hero to the nook each time he discovers that the two are not in their proper places. The dream of the gay men and the lesbians to finally be given space and freedom of expression is still a long journey to traverse. However, through stories like this, their small voices are beginning to be heard. Authors of children's literature vary in their opinions, though, when it comes to the issue of homosexuality or LGBT. In the four authors I interviewed, Villafuerte stresses his resounding negativity in the inclusion of topics like homosexuality or LGBT in children's literature. The three other authors categorically agree to tackle sensitive issues in children's literature, for according to them, touching on topics like this will prepare children to the realities they will encounter in the real world. The next story is titled No Lipstick for Mother. There was once a happy family composed of a father, a mother, and one daughter. The family earned their living through the father's work as a motorcycle driver. The mother stayed at home to do the homemaking task. The daughter studied in school. Everything was going all right until one day the news of the father's death came in. The wife mourned for the death of her husband. To move on with her life and be able to meet the demands of the daily living, the wife and mother was forced to assume the work of the dead husband. The wife drove her motorcycle and earned a living out of it. But their arrangement was not a welcome thing for the daughter. She was disturbed with the idea that her mother drove a motorcycle and eventually was not any more conscious whether she wore lipstick or not. She started to hate her mother. But when she began to hear good reports about her mother, instead of being hateful, she became proud of her mother, even with or without her lipstick on. It is unusual for a daughter to see her mother wearing working clothes, which are usually worn only by men. This is how single parenting may drastically call for a change in gender roles. As opposed to the nuclear family, single parenting is stressful for adults as well as for the children, especially for women single parents, as reflected in No Lipstick for Mother. The single parents may be overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for the children and the maintaining of a job, aside from keeping up with the bills and household chores. In the Philippines, the indigenous people, or the IPs, have an estimated population of 14 to 17 million distributed in 110 ethno-linguistic groups, mainly concentrated in Mindanao, Luzon, and parts of the Visayas, according to the data provided by the United Nations Development Program. Indigenous peoples regularly suffer discrimination and exclusion, such that many of them have developed inferiority, and the tendency to deny their ethnicity when mingling with the mainstream group. It poses a challenge for children's literature author to regain children's sense of ethnic pride through the character they encounter in the stories. When Abyong's father was offered a job far from mountainside Pasil, the whole family had no choice but to move to Tabuk City. Abyong feels bad about this, especially that he would have left his friends. But of course, he has no choice. He is worried, but he will not be able to fit in his new school. The reason why he does not think that he should wear bahag, even if the school allows it. His father talks to him the night before his first day of school, and he receives something magical, a magic bahag. According to his father, this has been passed from generations to generations, making the bearer overcome his fears. And now it's Abyong's time to wear it. The next day, he feels a mysterious energy flowing through him. He suddenly feels confident, and his confidence manifests as he attends classes. He changes his nickname to Ion to be cool, and he manages to befriend his classmates without the slightest glint of shyness. He performs well in science and math, and he even makes his team win basketball, even if he rarely play the sport since they hunt more in Pasil. In the afternoon, his new classmates sing the same song that his friends in Pasil used to sing. He remembers his old friends, but he realized that he is starting to have new ones now. And while he will never forget his old friends, he should appreciate his new friends too. He joins the singing and he enjoys their company. In Magic Bahag, the protagonist Abyong gains positive ethnic esteem after he realizes that retaining his identity as a Kalinga boy by wearing bahag in school is not something to be ashamed of after all. By being true to his identity, he gains respect from his classmates. The wearing of bahag, which is a unique garment worn by people of a particular group, serves only as a symbol for whatever uniqueness one's culture has. That any member of an ethnic group, for that matter, should not disregard. Toward the ending of the story, Abyong with pride approaches his father and mother to say, Nana, Nana, I can't believe it. I had lots of friends already, and I recited in classes. I was always raising my hand and got the right answers. Can you believe it? Tata, I was the best in class today. I even had lots of friends, and they listened to my stories. I was even the best player in basketball. He hugs his father. Thank you for your magic bahag. That is not a magic bahag, Abyong, his father admits. It was you who has the magic. In the process, Abyong acquires ethnic pride, which constitutes an affirmation of his dignity, affection, and self-respect, even at a young age, that is expressed toward his ethnic and cultural heritage. The fifth story is titled The Rag Picker's Son. Bottles, papers, rags! Rodel's dad calls out in a lusty voice as he pushes his cart around Mimosa Heights. On weekends, Rodel would tag along on his rounds, counting out coins in exchange for people's junk. But his favorite part is digging through the stuff in the cart after school. There's no telling what he would find. An old birdcage, perhaps an umbrella with broken ribs, a tarnished mirror, or a dusty hairpiece. It gives him an endless supply of odds and ends with which to keep his imagination and fingers busy making art. But what use does a rag picker's son have for art? Is he even capable of making art in the first place? Rodel's classmate, Brian, doesn't think so, and he sets out to prove it when Rodel is chosen to represent their school in an on-the-spot art contest. The disparity between the rich and the poor is ageless. The larger the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, the greater the possibility of conflicts to arise. In the stories analyzed, the rag picker's son has explicitly, though implicitly as well, explored the possibility of developing a mere classroom behavioral problem into an overarching conflict due to class difference. Brian's rich middle-class background is juxtaposed with Rodel's very poor situation, being a son of a rag picker, whose only means of living is collecting garbage from a nearby subdivision. Ruben and his son Rodel's fate is so dependent on what he can dig from the trash and leftover stuffs of people with money. Rodel had the chance to enroll in the best school for boys in town by virtue of a scholarship for poor but gifted children. Thus, he gets to know Brian, the son of Mr. Lopez, an art gallery owner. Rodel has an eye for beauty, and he can make beautiful art pieces out of the junk his father have collected. Miss Cruz, the art teacher, praised Rodel for his excellent drawing output. This angered Brian, for Rodel now becomes his close rival in the coming art competition in school. Brian's anger boiled over when Rodel was picked to represent the school in an on-the-spot art contest. The following morning, in art class, Brian stood up and started crying. His art set was missing. Somebody had taken it from his bag. As the boy unfolds, Brian pointed to Rodel as the one who stole his art materials, for Rodel cannot afford to buy his own. In the end, it was found out through Miss Cruz's investigation that Brian just manufactured the idea of his missing art materials to pull down and humiliate Rodel. The conflict between Brian and Rodel did not progress into a big class struggle, for the adults in the story, especially Mr. Lopez, Brian's father, apologized for what happened, and Brian handed his art materials to Rodel as a form of gift. In the final analysis, the didactic goal of teaching good values to children is achieved. However, the fact remains that no change will happen to the living conditions of Ruben and his son Rodel. Ruben will remain a rag picker, and Mr. Lopez will continue to own an art gallery, which symbolizes his upper status in society. Oppression of the poor continues. As for Rodel, he remains vulnerable to the discriminating acts of people like Brian. The story, though, leaves a hopeful promise that someday, through Rodel's intelligence and skills, the course of his life will change. The fifth story is Magnificent Benito and his two front teeth. There was once a young boy who was born with a full set of teeth. When he grew up, his two front teeth turned out to be the biggest and the ugliest of all. Benito's front teeth were the source of his insecurities. Because of this, he tried all the possible and impossible ways to get rid of his teeth. But all of those attempts did not succeed. One day, he decided to use his two front teeth to his advantage. He thought of ideas how to make his own two ugly front teeth useful. On his own, Benito studied how to sculpt using his ugly big front teeth, and he was able to create sculptures that made him popular. It turned out that his biggest obstacle to success became his own way to achieving it. It became the source of his craftsmanship. The persons with disability or handicap can also be considered as another group of individuals that should receive attention in literature. It is relevant for children to know and be introduced to the realities that people share similarities and differences as well. Through exploring characters in literature, children not only learn about various disabilities, but they can also understand characters with disabilities as full and complex beings, similar in many ways to themselves. In Magnificent Benito and his two front teeth, the protagonist named Benito suffers from inferiority complex because of his two ugly front teeth. Benito was very determined to remove his teeth. He tried eating candies and chocolates, but his teeth did not ache. He had been to all the dentists in town, but none of them could pull out his ugly big front teeth. Consulted a tooth fairy, got the strongest rope, tied one end of it to his front teeth, and tied the other end to a mahogany tree, and ran off, hoping the rope would pull his teeth out. None of those tricks were successful. Since then, he resigned to the idea of pulling his teeth. Instead, he resolved not to blame his ugly big front teeth as the reason for his seemingly luckless life. He has learned to accept them as part of himself. He also thought of the most magnificent way to put them to good use. Benito studied how to sculpt using his ugly big front teeth. He created different sculpture made out of all sorts of materials. Somehow, the solution to Benito's problem offered by the text would call acceptance of one's physical handicap and thinking of ways to turn challenge into an opportunity. On a positive note, the story of Benito is empowering. It leaves hope for those children suffering from physical handicap. Any physical disability cannot dampen the soul of a person with positive outlook. Another story I wish to share with you is the Storyteller and the Giant. There was a town called Alamat. This town used to be known as a rich town with many big houses and buildings, but now it is a deserted town after a giant attacked it that brought the people of the town to live outside the town in tents. A storyteller came to visit the town to get information before he can write his version of the story. He met a boy named Luis and his father, Capitan Julio, who is the leader of the town. He walked around to gather information about what really happened and what caused the giant to attack the town. As the storyteller and the boy Luis talked, news about the arrival of two wounded people came in, Lord Aguila and Master Lawin. Lord Aguila was the strongest warrior in the kingdom, while Master Lawin was a legendary sorcerer. The warrior and the sorcerer were sent by the Datu to fight against the giant. But the two failed to defeat the giant because the two of them were not united in their purpose. In the course of the storyteller's investigation, it came out that the giant was only provoked to attack the town when he witnessed the children of the town quarreling and bullying Pepe, the youngest and sickly-looking boy among the members of the group. Towards the end of the storyteller had written his story, and he continued to journey to the other side of the mountain to get another scoop for his story. We can relate the event in this story to the militant and the rebel group sentiments. Despite the efforts to campaign for peace, reconciliation, and unity in the country, still the Filipinos are constantly threatened by the reality of ongoing unrest in Mindanao, in the Visayas, and in Luzon. The storyteller and the giant provides a scenario of one of many problems in the country that is still alive, and members of militant groups continue to maintain, if not increase, their numbers. The setting of the story is the town of Alamat. The people of the town are displaced. They live in makeshift tents outside the town after a wicked giant destroyed the whole town. The people have been waiting for help from the central government ruled by one called Datu. The Datu had previously sent two able fighters to defeat the giant, who are Lord Aguila, the warrior, and Master Lawin, the sorcerer. Luis, the son of Capitan Julio, was waiting for another reinforcement to help in protecting them from the giant. He thought the incoming man was the only one, or was the one sent by the Datu. But Luis was mistaken, for the guest who arrived was not a warrior but a storyteller. The storyteller came to investigate what actually happened, for many stories have been told about how things happened in the town of Alamat. By the incessant character of the storyteller, who may be represented by, or who may represent the news reporters or the media, it was found out that the chaotic situation the people are in began when Luis, along with his friends, started to bully or discriminate a boy named Pepe. One day, at the foot of the mountain near the town of Alamat, the giant overheard the children picking on Pepe because of his size. This angered the giant, for he had already witnessed a similar experience of discrimination even among the community of giants. He himself had experienced being discriminated by other giants. Among the giants, this giant who attacked the town of Alamat was the smallest. The conflict was resolved through the efforts of the storyteller, who went out of the way to get the giant to talk and air his side of the story, and the boy Luis took the responsibility of his acts by telling the whole story to the people of Alamat, even if it meant marring his reputation as son of a town leader, Capitan Julio. The whole gamut of the conflict between the state and the members of the rebel groups cannot simply describe, or cannot be simply described through the simple children's story as the storyteller and the giant. However, this gives a simple scenario that conflicts start whenever there are individuals who feel discriminated, abused, and receive unequal treatment. The displaced people of Alamat were victims of the situation and became part of the collateral damage. The solution offered by the text to counter the increasing militancy and insurgency problems faced by the country is still through peaceful negotiations and people like the storyteller, who is in constant quest for the truth, are needed. The next story is GAGAMBA, the spider from the islands. GAGAMBA is a spider from the islands, or from the Philippines, that was unintentionally brought to the United States. as it is found in the staff of a boy who is frequently addressed as Bata in the story. The boy's family migrated to the US. Gagamba would always nag the boy to think of ways and opportunities for her to be transported back to the Philippines. The boy attempted to sneak in Gagamba among the staff in the balikbayan boxes of his uncles and aunties, but all three attempts failed. One day, Gagamba did not ask to be transported back to the Philippines anymore, as she has already found joy and inspiration in the company of her young baby spiders. The story depicts the adaptation of the Filipino diaspora. Wherever in the world one goes, he always finds the Filipino. Majority of Filipinos go abroad for one and the same reason, to look for greener pastures. A parcel of the Filipino migrants' experience is captured in the story of Gagamba. The situation of Gagamba being uprooted from her comfort zone in the Philippines to live and survive in a foreign land describes the plight of Filipino migrants the first time they set foot in a foreign land. The story only implicitly touch on the reason why she migrated to America. The reader can only get the hint that she was uprooted from her own country, and perhaps going back to the Philippines was not easy because of immigration concerns, especially if no legal documents can be presented. In this case, the Filipina represented by Gagamba is probably having PNT or a tago ng tago status, as exemplified by Gagamba, who lives in the garage and never leaves there. Immigrating is a tough and stressful experience. The first few months may be difficult, but after overcoming depression and the feeling of alienation, the promise of a new day starts again. Gagamba has learned to live and love the garage where she lives, most especially after she realizes she now has her own young baby spiders to take care of. Occasionally, she expresses her longing to go back to the island of her origin, but the thought of her babies prompts her to remain. As it is said, home is where the heart is. This is the life of a Filipino migrant, a citizen of the world. The last of the 8 stories is about a boy named Pedrito. Pedrito is always sleeping instead of studying in school, but it's not his fault. Every night, the tikbalang, asong itim, and manananggal visit his house and keep him awake until the break of dawn. But one day, Pedrito discovers that his father, a Filipino seaman, has been kidnapped by Somali pirates. To save his father, Pedrito makes a deal with the monsters, and together they fly off on Manananggal's wings to the other side of the world. They find the hijacked ship and fight against the pirates, but must leave before the pirate captain is defeated. Back home, Pedrito discovers that he must now find a way to keep his bargain with the monsters. The Filipino seafarers' challenging world. Anybody who is familiar with Calao Street in the city of Manila would observe the constant influx of Filipino seamen, hopefully waiting to receive good news for opportunities of working in shipping lines with international routes. When one's father is a seaman, the promise of a convenient living condition is ensured. Pedrito, in Monster Rescue, a children's story for adult readers, is a seaman's son. He does not worry about going to school with empty stomach, But he goes to school with dark spots under his eyes, caused by lack of sleep. Every night, three monsters would visit Pedrito in his dreams. The asong itim, the manananggal, and the tikbalang. Monsters are supposed to be imagined as horrifying creatures used to scare off children whenever they become unruly or noisy. However, Pedrito is not afraid of the three monsters. In fact, he considers them his friends. The text reads, Pedrito's papa used to tell him stories all the time about the three monsters. Even though the stories were scary, Pedrito himself was never scared. He was only scared after his papa left home to work as a seaman on an oil tanker. The lines above show how the absence of a father affects the child. The promise of a convenient life may not be felt by a son as young as Pedrito, whose attachment to his father is measured not much by the number of toys and candies he received as pasalubong, but by his real presence in his day-to-day activities. Pedrito's longing for his father is even worsened with the bad news that his father has been one of those seamen abducted by Somali pirates. As one of the major contributors in the Philippine economy, the Filipino seaman's job is both important for the country and his families. The Filipino seaman's sacrifices include the loss of time and important moments with family, and the danger they put themselves as they work in the seas, braving the big waves and the danger posed by the presence of pirates, not to mention the boredom and loneliness of being away from home. In conclusion, it can be gleaned from the stories, the 8 stories presented, that literature for children have opened doors for the discussion of issues relevant to diverse cultural and social groups in the Philippines, such as the gay men and lesbians, the single parents, the indigenous peoples, the economically marginalized, the physically handicapped, the militant rebels, the migrant, and the seafarer. The stories for Filipino children are contemporary and tackled issues of cultural and social relevance. It opened up avenues for discussion of crucial issues confronting Philippine society. Moreover, children's stories are reflective of the convergence of the cultures of the East and the West. Hence, children's stories in the Philippines have global perspectives. Finally, may I encourage everyone to pay attention to what our very own Filipino authors have written for our children. Every day and more so in this time of pandemic, the stories are a rich resource for entertainment, and also the stories teach us about life. They are for children as well as for adults. I-comment ang inyong mga katanungan at mga kuro-kuro tungkol sa ating episode ngayong araw. Huwag kalimutang i-like at i-share ang episode natin. Sa muli, ako si Concepcion G. Belza from Philippine Normal University Mindanao at sumasa inyo ang PNU Talks.